So I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar, and I'm Mike Aoki. I'll be the host for today's session. And we're really focusing here in terms of breakthrough contact center technologies to engage Millennial and Gen Z customers. And of course, Millennials and Gen Z together are actually a huge group, a huge demographic group. More than half the customer base out there is going to be Millennials and Gen Z. And so it's really important to be able to engage them as customers. And there's some great new technologies coming through now that will help you be able to do that in your contact center. And I'm very fortunate to be joined by an amazing panel. I just want to introduce them right now, and they can say a bit more about themselves as well. You can also read their bios on the registration page, but I want to introduce John Triano from VP of Sales at Infant Solutions, also Tony Power, Solutions Consultant at 8x8, and Vasily Triant, Chief Business Officer at UJet. And I want to welcome all three of you to today's panel. And we'll actually start right now in terms of really focusing in terms of questions. Now we've got a few set questions right now that I'll ask the panel, but as well, we want to hear from you too. So what I'd suggest is that at any point during this session, you can jot down and type into the chat window or the Q&A window, either one of those, chat or Q&A in this Zoom browser, to be able to go and type in your questions for the panel and just address who you want the question to be addressed to. So do you want to go to John, Tony, or Vasily? And also, what is your question? And we'll have a couple of Q&A sessions throughout the session, throughout today's webinar. So roughly halfway through, and again at the end, you'll have a chance to go and ask questions. And I'll actually read off the questions that you typed in to the panel so we can get some great answers for that. There's also some information as well I want to share with you. And so I want to turn the first question over to Vasily Triant at UJet. And Vasily, the question for you is, what's different about how Millennials and Gen Zs choose to engage?
Well, Mike, we've been stuck talking about omni-channel for digital natives for more than a decade now. But in the meantime, human interaction has evolved. Millennial digital natives have given way to Gen Z mobile natives. And I think the biggest misconception out there is that the generational behavior can be neatly segmented, when the truth is that the youngest and most progressive generational segment actually establishes the new table stakes for all generations. We've been trying to tackle a never-ending stream of channel stacking for years, when really we need to meet customers where they are. And what's really needed is a multimodal approach that embeds that experience. As you look here at some of the statistics, right? I mean, consumers are spending over 5 hours a day on their smartphone, and greater than 25% of Gen Z, people have owned a smartphone by age 10, whereas millennials grew up when smartphones didn't exist. Smartphones really came out towards kind of the end of their, growth in their professional careers, right? And app usage has doubled since 2018. It's projected that app spending is going to be at 139 billion in the next couple years. And so when you look at not only are two different generations growing up in different kind of uses, one in this whole omni-channel digitalization, whereas Gen Z is more focused within the smartphone, within the applications that are on there. That's frankly, it's proliferating throughout all generations. And it's your customers, us, especially with all the changes in behavior over the last 8 to 10 months, we're in our apps engaging with our brands, or in web engaging with our brands. And so we really need to meet our customers where they are. Oh, you're muted, Mike.
I am. Thank you very much. That sounds really great, though, Vasily. It's such a change, isn't it, in terms of how people are engaging, and what happens with that. And I want to turn things over, actually, just for a comment to Tony from 8x8 in terms of how can businesses ensure a consistent and really personal customer experience while volume is increasing, and of course, budgets are shrinking and the workforce is remote. So how can you help with that?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So one of the keys is offering a personalized AI-driven self-service. We looked at a Forrester research study from earlier this year. Roughly 2/3, so 68% of customers would rather self-educate than talk to a salesperson. Most consumers don't want to talk to a human because, frankly, buying from a website is more convenient than buying from an actual human being. And if you're in doubt about that, just think about every time that you use Amazon or anytime you shop online. You probably have a pretty good sense of what you want to buy before you go in to make that buying decision. And consumers, millennials and Gen Z in particular, they're following that model. So assuming that they want help from a human right away is kind of a fallacy. With that in mind, though, the customers, especially if it's an AI-driven engagement, they're expecting some level of personalization. So they want to know the interaction needs to be tailored to their purchase history. It needs to be tailored to their preferences. You've got to have some context around the interaction. So put all that together and make sure that any AI that you're implementing accounts for those things and talks to a customer database and can recognize that transactional history. Second piece to keep in mind is you've got to provide contact center options beyond just the telephone. I'm not millennial or Gen Z. I've aged out of that demographic, but I'm pretty similar in my communication preferences. And if the only option that you're going to give me is to make a phone call, then I'm not going to do business with you. And that's pretty much, full stop. You saw Vasily slides about how much millennials and Gen Z, how often they're using their smartphones and how much time they spend on them. And they're not using those phones to make phone calls. They're using it because they're using social media, they're using web chat, they're using SMS. 70% of those companies from that Forrester study expected to see an increase in social media and web chat over the next year. And 60% are expecting an increase in self-service over the phone. And if you're not planning for it, your competitors are. So you've got to make sure that you're accounting for that. And then the last piece, and this might be one of the most important, is that you need to empower your agents. Interactions are going to grow about 2.5% year over year, but the number of interactions that actually get to an agent that are handled by a human, they're actually going to decrease by about 2%. What that means is that the agents that ultimately handle these interactions, they're going to be more specialized. They're going to be required to handle escalations, upset callers, challenging or complex interactions. And as a result, the accurate and complete first interaction resolution is going to take precedence over more historically important metrics like handle time or speed of answer. So with all that in mind, organizations have to reduce all the noise on the agent desktop. You think about if you want them to handle chats and social media and phone calls and email and SMS, you don't want them to have to log into 10 different applications to get their job done. That's just challenging in general, doesn't make for a good agent experience. If you can reduce that noise on their desktop and streamline all the different applications that they have to use, and streamline all of the knowledge that they're going to have access to, you're on the right track. So make sure that they can make decisions that are in the best interest of the company and the customer, give them that capability, make their job as easy as possible. And those are kind of the three areas that you have to start from. But each of those could be, 2 or 3 hours worth of discussion on its own.
Okay, great. I know you can go into a lot more detail about that, Tony, because it is such a huge topic, isn't it? And I love the fact that the different perspectives that you had, Tony, from the agent standpoint and the agent desktop standpoint, and Vasily from what the customers out there, the Millennial and Gen Z customers, and what they're looking for as well. So, there's just so much technology that's changing so rapidly now in the contact center industry. And of course, one of the biggest things we're looking at right now is AI. And that's also another big thing to go and take a look at. And so we want to do a quick little poll, a quick little survey here. So I'm going to go and show a little poll in front of you. And for all of you there watching from your home offices right now, there should be a poll in front of you. Just feel free to go and vote for one of these answers, either yes or no. Are you using AI-driven activities in your contact center practice today? And either yes or no to that. So a quick little poll for you, then I'll share the results in a moment. I wish I had a little bit of theme music here, the Jeopardy theme or something playing.
I'll come back over here.
That's right, Tony. You got all the musical instruments there. All right, I'll give it a few more seconds. We got about 2/3 of you have voted so far, but we'll give it a few more seconds. Okay, so just click yes or no on that if you're using AI. All right, so share the results right now. Okay, so share the results on screen. And so surprisingly, 56% of you are not using AI in your contact center. That's actually a little bit surprising, but we'll see in terms of what our third panelist, John, has to go and say about that. And 44% are saying yes right now. And so I'll just turn things over to John from Inference. And the question for you is, why and where do you see contact centers leveraging more intelligent virtual agents? So looking at AI virtual agents now.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for monitoring the panel, by the way. Appreciate that. Well, we're seeing it in a number of different areas, particularly in improving the front end of the customer service experience within the contact center. So using conversational AI or natural language processing rather than what we've used previously in contact centers, which is either DTMF routing or directed dialogue routing, which is, press 1 and say sales, or press 2 and say customer support. Today, contact centers are utilizing AI-driven virtual agents to basically man things like saying, "Hey, Mike, thanks for being a Marriott Rewards customer. How can I help you today?" And providing that, what we consider that conversational experience. They're also using it in a number of places. So doing things like FAQs, help desk activities, whether it's in IT or whether it's in travel or HR department. And then employee activities like shift bids. We're seeing some of the largest retailers in the world using it to basically augment their agents, and so that the customer can go in, or in this case, the employee can go in and self-service that activity. So a lot of self-service, a lot of front end, and working together and taking a lot of the routine, or what many people would consider mundane activities in a contact center, like password resets, et cetera, FAQs, or things like doing opening cases or pre-qualification, simple pre-qualifications, can be done with intelligent virtual agents, leaving the contact center, the live agents, to do the more complex deep dive type of activities.
Okay, great. That sounds very interesting, John, in terms of doing that, the virtual AI kind of taking, as you said, those mundane kind of things away. And of course, that'll affect the remaining agents because they have to have additional skills, right? And ability to be able to handle those tougher calls,
Exactly.
interactions that are coming through. Okay, good. Excellent. And I'll just ask a question right now in terms of this, because we'll look at a quick little Q&A here, roughly half the way through. And so just a quick question for all three of you is in terms of, we've talked about different aspects of technology now in terms of engaging those millennial and Gen Z customers. What do you think a contact center leader, VP, SVP, what should they be looking for as they start to plan out 2021? Because of course that's coming up now. So just any advice or tips that you might have.
Vasily here, Mike. I'll jump in and then let my fellow panelists answer as well. There's been a rush this year to just modernize the technology stack and get to the ability to service customers when we're not sitting in brick and mortar anymore, right? So you got, agents working at home. There's a lot of companies that were caught on their heels with big on-prem, bulky contact centers still, and they need their agents to work remote, right? So that's kind of been the focus now. But what's actually shifting at the same time is that consumers are actually stuck at home as well, and they're now engaging more via web and mobile devices. And so the behaviors are changing, and what's making them sticky is becoming different than what used to be before, whether it was just branding or going into actual like retail stores or branches or whatever that may be. So 2021, you got to start focusing on, what do my consumers, what do my customers, how do they want to engage me? What do they expect in the end? Forget just my product and service, get away from a lot of the legacy metrics that are out there, and start thinking as a consumer, and how do you want to interact with your brand, right? Whatever that may be. There's been so much channel steering out there that if you really want to keep your customers sticky going forward, expectations have just changed across the board from all of us sitting here, even on this. What do we expect of the applications we're using here, right? The video and everything else. That's changing in customer experience, and leaders have to start focusing on, what do my consumers for my specific industry expect of us, and how do I stay on top of that?
Okay, good. Now, that's a really good point. In terms of looking ahead towards next year, again, it's the expectations, right? It's the contact center leader's expectation. It's the customer's expectations. Yeah. So Tony, John, any comments that you want to give towards that question for next year?
Tony, I'll let you go first.
I was just going to echo what Vasily said, but keep in mind that consumers are contacting customer service departments more often over a much greater number of channels than in the past, right? We went from phone being ubiquitous forever, and then email started to creep in, and now within the last few years, it's email, social, SMS, all these different options. And we need to, number one, make sure that we're accounting for what our customers want, but we need to make sure that we can manage those different expectations and manage those different channels appropriately. it's going to be cumbersome to try to consolidate all that so that the agents can handle it in an effective way. And it's also going to impact the way that we probably hire going forward. Agents that can be really effective in chat or text-based communications are going to be more valuable than those who might have had a historically really strong phone presence.
Okay. I would agree with everything that both Vasily and Tony have said. I would add one thing, or two things actually. Number one, during this event we've had, this pandemic, which we call COVID, 70% of people change brands. I saw a survey where 70% of people actually change the brand that they're using during this crisis, which tells me that a lot of people weren't ready for it, obviously. And I think there's going to be a big activity in the future where a lot of businesses, contact center solutions, et cetera, corporations are looking at it and going, hey, I was caught unaware and unready and unprepared. And there's going to be a huge activity in the next few months, once this is all over, where people are going to say, I need you to come in and harden my systems and make sure that we're not caught like this a second time again. And so if I were an SVP of a contact center, I'd be looking at what are the technologies that I'm going to do to make sure that that doesn't happen to me again. Whether it's agents, one of the things we saw was there were a lot of companies that couldn't hire people fast enough once business started ramping back up again. I have one client that said his turnover is 103% a year annually in his contact center. Very, very high turnover rate. He said, I can't hire people fast enough in order to replace those folks in a normal business environment. Add COVID to it and it changes. So I think a lot of those activities will be happening as well in the future.
Okay, that was a dramatic number, 103%.
Yes,
turnover.
103%.
So again, it just gets into, part of the other piece of this is when you have that kind of turnover or just any kind of turnover is, how challenging it can be sometimes to retrain your agents, right? And how to use technology. And so as you look at AI virtual agents, maybe taking off part of that load, with things, looking at the mobility apps, again, taking off part of that as well, it may streamline things for the agents themselves. For all three of you, how do you see that as far as, the agent's skill level in terms of dealing with this technology? Will there be an impact on them, or is it more on the IT department side or more on the manager's side to help maintain this technology? So John, I'll go with you first in terms of what do you think about that in terms of?
I think it's always the management's job to set their employees up for success. And so if you put systems in place that you have not allocated the right training mechanisms, whether it's the actual trainer or the dollars, or the time away from the phones or the contact center software to do those type of training activities, then it's on the management, because employees, it's all driven top down. Employees are going to do what the leaders of their organization are going to say. So I think it's critical that you build that into your mechanism to allow them. AI is only as smart as you will let it be. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people think AI is just, wow, I put an AI system in place and boom, it's just off and running and it's going to do everything I want it to do. A lot of these AI systems have to be trained, they have to be programmed, and they have to be tuned over a period of time in order to get them where they need to be. And you have to build that into your model. If you don't, you're setting yourself up for failure. So it's not just a plug and play environment, and that's something that people have to realize from the start.
Okay, good. No, that's important to know as well in terms of who's programming this, right? Who's putting these patterns in, to do that. And so let me ask you a question about mobility apps in terms of this, because I guess the same thing, there's a bit of a tug and war sometimes between the marketing team and the contact center and who owns the app or how do you use the app for both marketing and customer service. What are your thoughts of that? Where do you land in that discussion, Vasily?
Well, I think that, the app itself is going to be owned by either IT or some, outward facing organization, whether it's marketing or IT, doesn't really matter. But when you blend the contact center or any other department within the business into there, you have to start looking at things holistically. It's not just, here's my app on how I'm going to create, a purchasing experience, but the consumers are there and then they're like, I just bought something and I need to now have a question answered, or I need something else, and it's contact center. Traditionally, we've separated those departments as just an entire business market, right? We are the purchasing, we are the sales type department, sales and marketing, and contact center or customer experience is after the fact. And there's no correlation between the two. We keep talking about how customer experience is more relevant to lifetime value, to attrition, to retention than ever. But the brands, a lot of folks still have not connected those dots. And it should just be a team effort in bringing that all together. I don't think that who owns it matters. It's that it is our consumer-facing app, and those consumers expect to engage all parts of our organization through that. That's the behavior that's changed. And frankly, contact centers, our entire industry hasn't gotten there yet. We still talk about channel stacking, just like we did in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s. It was like there's voice, and then there's IVR and voice, and there's speech, and then there's chat, and then there's email. And we continue to stack all these things. And yet in the last 15 years, I guess you'd say the last 13 years, really, the consumer behavior has completely changed because of technology. And that means we all need to operate differently, not just as contact center technology providers, but the businesses that are offering these services as well.
Okay. And Vasily, I like that point that you made about it being holistic. That's the key for the organization, not having to be in one department or another, one channel or another. It should all work together. Because as a customer, I know when I call place, email place, chat with them, I want it all to work. And no matter what channel I pick, I want to get help with something in there. Tony, a question for you, because you touched upon this a bit earlier, the whole idea about the integration of all these tools, the integration of all these channels, and what that means for the chief customer experience officer, for the VP or SVP of the contact center. What advice would you give them if they're kind of beginning to do this digital transformation, thinking, how do I get these different channels to really, truly be seamless, both for customers and for their agents? What would you advise them on? What advice would you have?
So thinking about it from the agent perspective first, I alluded to this a little bit before, but if your agent, in order to do their job, if your agent has to have 10 different applications open on their desktop, it's not a great agent experience. Probably everybody on this webinar knows that happy agents ultimately lead to happy customers. And if an agent is impeded from doing their job in some way, it's going to translate, right? It's going to mean longer handle times. It's going to mean that I might not be giving you the most relevant information because I've got to get it from different spots. So streamline that desktop and consolidate, like to Vasily's point, rather than having individual stacks of different channels, you've got to consolidate that into one single experience for the agent. The second piece of that is from a data management perspective. If your AI or if your process has to grab information from 10 different locations, you got to make sure that the agent only has to read it in one spot, whether that's knowledge-based information, whether it's customer history, purchase history, whatever else. You've got to make it so that when I'm interacting with you, if I'm an agent, I can get everything I need from one single point of reference. So if that means merging CRMs, or if that means merging all this data in the background so that I can have a consolidated script up front or a consolidated knowledge base, that's key to making that transaction as successful as possible. Otherwise, you're going to have agents that are going to get burned out, frustrated, and it's going to translate to a poor experience.
Good. Now, that's really great advice as well about having that unified desktop. And that's obviously one of the big goals that, that agents would love to go and have, going forward as well. So I want to thank all three of you for answering those different sort of ad hoc questions as well. And again, this is the Q&A session that we're doing. And I encourage everybody watching this webinar to go and type in questions. So either in the Q&A window or chat window, type in questions, because in a few minutes, we'll go back to our second Q&A session near the end of today's webinar. So you can actually ask those questions and have them answered at that point in time. Now, I know, John, you had, and I'll just go back to sharing the screen here, a question as well, or actually, sorry, Vasily, a question as well for you, which is in terms of looking at how are the most successful companies tackling some of the challenges that we've talked about? So what are some of the success stories or case studies that you've seen?
Well, I want to start first, Mike. I'm going to go a little bit kind of out of process here. Just, stay on maybe we can actually keep there. It's fine. I think the first part is, what John and what Tony were talking about, completely agree with. And what John kind of hit on around artificial intelligence, right? There's like this trend right now that if I put in AI, first off, that it's like the Terminator and we got robots that think on their own and they're all of a sudden handling everything intelligently on the front end. And the reality is we have to do the things that, we've already been talking about, or I've, kind of brought up a few points already, but we actually have to add intelligence and automation into the process instead of thinking about artificial intelligence. It doesn't just run on its own. Like John said, it has to be programmed. You have to add lots of bits in there, but also you have to bring it all together and think about there's four essentially different personas in any customer experience solution, right? And so before I talk about this case study here, you have the consumer, right? And the consumer is the one persona that we're focusing on: retention, lifetime value, how do we make them happy? The second persona is the agent, right? And you heard Tony and John both also speak about like being able to consolidate things, make their job easier. The combination of those two is going to determine a little bit of that happy interaction. But then you have your supervisors gathering data. That data then creates ultimately another plan to deliver another outcome, right? And we've been stuck as an industry in things like first call resolution times, decreased handle times. What is the cost? How many minutes are we spending? How many agents are we applying? And we'll talk about virtual agent in a moment. And the fourth is the administrators or the people implementing and making these changes, how fluid and flexible you can be. The most successful brands that are out there are thinking about all of these components. They're thinking about, how do I add intelligence in the right places and automation to take the simple tasks off and take my live people and put them in the most complex tasks or the variability that exists in that interaction in order to handle it, ultimately to deliver a happy outcome. Focusing just on making a happy agent or consolidating the desktop, that's just one piece of a larger complex puzzle. FCR is the result of actually doing all those other things. Reduced cost is the result of doing all those other things. So when you think about customer experience, we talk about how the consumers have changed. If you meet the customers where they're at, so they're in their mobile application or they're in web, they want to be able to contact the brand immediately right there. And they want to be able to do it on their channel of preference. Now we think of channel today as Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, SMS, voice, chat, email. But the reality is it's either a textual mode or it's a live voice mode. And you may then want to also share information therein. The only reason why those other channels exist, if you really think about it, is I'm going to go complain and whine because I actually didn't get my problem solved where I already was. And I'm just going to think about myself. I have a major brand I deal with very frequently. They've changed their experience during COVID, not in a positive way. And every time I'm like, you know what? I'm ticked off. They didn't solve my problem. I've literally hung up the phone. So yes, they got shorter handle time because I just hung up the phone. And I think I'm going to go to Twitter or Facebook and I'm just going to launch into them. Now, being a customer experience executive, I also think like, okay, I'm not going to go do that right now. Everybody's going to, crucify you nowadays in what kind of comments you post. But I just wanted my problem to be solved and I wanted to provide them the information there, and they didn't do it. So I was going to go to social to try to get attention. And all those other channels, that's what happens. It's for the lack of engaging the consumer where they already are that we go out to all these other channels. So the most successful brands think about where they're engaging. And if you look at Instacart right here, right, their business is on-demand technology to deliver you goods and services at your home. Shoppers are in an application procuring products, asking for their services. So they've basically added those channels that customers want to communicate with them, specifically here, chat and voice, into their mobile application, right? So leveraging the UJET embedded experience, we also call it the mobile SDK, and then also doing personalized segmentation and routing. So being able to, again, here, leverage intelligence about, we can see things like geolocation of where a customer's at. So forget asking them, some of the basic questions like, where are you at? Or what were you doing? Where were you at within the application itself too? There's so much data out there. Grab that data, apply intelligence to it, skip some of the simple steps, solve the problem. And then the results here weren't because the technology was focused on that result. The technology was focused on making a happy interaction. What actually happened was then agents reduced shopper repeat customers by 5.6% on voice, or almost 5% on in-app chat, right? Being able to drive quicker resolution, they got shorter resolution times by 30%. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to make happy customers, so you got repeat business. They improved SLAs 18% on voice and 23% for in-app chat. And ultimately optimize reporting by bringing all that data into one application. So too many times we focus on these actual metrics, thinking like, okay, we want to reduce hold times or answer times, by 30%. You want to increase repeat customers. and we focus on the wrong things. Whereas if we focus on the happy interaction and solving those problems where the consumers are at, we'll get the results in the end. That's how the most successful brands are handling these things.
Okay, good. No, thanks, Vasily. I like that. That's great advice as well, because again, it's really results, right? In terms of what happens with, with that. So it's important not to get lost. I know with contact centers, there are just so many metrics. You mentioned some of them in terms of first call resolution, right? Handle time, all of those things, but ultimately it's about the customer, right? And what they're looking for. So I love that. And thanks for the Instacart example, because it's an organization that everyone's heard of before, and certainly very big right now with what's happening with, COVID and online shopping and everything else. So it's a great example to go and use. So thank you with that. And I want to ask another question too, for John as well, this time for John. And, the question itself will really be shaped in terms of the next survey that we'll take. So I just want to show a quick survey here that John suggested. And this particular survey really deals with the use of virtual agents. So I'll just launch that right now so you can see it in front of you. And the question is, do you have plans to add or increase the number of intelligent virtual agents in the next 12 months? So give you a chance to vote on that. Just click yes or no to that. I'll give you a few more seconds for you to vote, then we'll share the results so we can see what the survey shows. And I know, John, you got some comments based on that.
I'm going to have to rethink my my presentation because Vasily, he kind of jumped on my analogy of Terminator before.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize.
I'm coming up with some different analogies.
All right. Well, they're playing action movies out there, so we'll see about that.
Yeah.
All right. I'll share the results right now in terms of what we have. So just to share these results on screen. Good to see. Okay, 88% voted yes. So 80% voted yes in terms of looking at intelligent virtual agents for the next 12 months. And so, John, I'll ask you a question in terms of this, which is, and people have thought about this before. Are you suggesting replacing live agents with virtual agents? What's going on here?
Yeah, it's funny because I get this a lot. First off, people are, there's the natural fear within any type of vertical or industry around change. And so we get a lot of comments about why are you trying to get rid of agents? We're not seeing any sort of mass wholesale replacement of agents. I don't think that's what is being contemplated. It's more of a hybrid model, a combination of live agents with virtual technology and AI and building out virtual agents. We're not building Skynet. We're not trying to take over the world with this. I think there will always be that combination. Now, are there organizations that go in and say, hey, I've been asked to do this task. My budget's not increasing, but my boss says I've got to take on this new pool of customers or whatever, and I don't have cost to do that. And so they look at the massive cost savings you can get from putting a virtual in there. It's many times 80 to 90% versus a live. But let's be very candid. If someone came to me today and said, I have this I need to hire 100 agents, I'm going to do it with virtual. And oh, by the way, they're going to do complex deep dives into people's accounts and solve it for them. I'd say, great, you need to hire 100 live agents to do that, because AI is not really built to do that today. AI is built to do things, and this is where you really see the benefits. Extending the hours of service. Let's say you've got a contact center that's 9 to 5 and they're not wanting to hire agents on the weekends or at nights or graveyard shift. Using intelligent virtual agents to supplement that time so that when those people come back in the morning, they're not inundated with all the workload that came in during the night or during the weekends. Doing things like being able to rapidly change and scale upward and downward. Those are things that virtual agents can do very well. In a contact center environment, that's a little bit more difficult when you're doing it with live agents. Those are the kind of things you're looking at, getting efficiencies, doing pieces of work in a very efficient manner, especially those, and I hate to use the word mundane, but they're more maybe repetitive type of tasks that typically will burn out live agents. They'll get bored with it and they'll move on, or they'll say, wow, this isn't the kind of job that I want for me. So you're really creating a hybrid environment. I think that's where it is. I'm not really seeing the wholesale replacement. In fact, typically it's more of a extending the type of live environment you have with the virtual agent.
Okay, good. And that's a really great backdrop as well in terms of that sort of question about, what's going to happen with the future of virtual agent AI. So it sounds going to be both, going forward. Okay, good. Thanks, John. I appreciate that. And one last formal question in terms of this, and this one's for you, Tony, in terms of looking at this, is as a contact center leader, and I hear this from other contact center leaders as well, is how can I justify the investment, the actual cost or budget in AI, mobility, and other forms of digital transformation of my CEO, CFO, CTO, et cetera? What's some advice you can give to those VPs, SVPs out there from the contact centers?
So again, there's kind of three pillars to this one. The first one deals with scalability, or more accurately, building the ROI around how you're going to scale your business. Organizations that use robotic process automation, which is kind of the catch-all for bots, virtual agents, you name it. Organizations that are using those for the more repetitive processes tend to see gains in performance of about 40 to 45% on average, and a reduction of costs by about 40%. So those two metrics right there are going to help you build a pretty solid ROI for why you should be moving in that direction. Keep in mind, chatbots or virtual bots are your friend. If we have a high volume, low complexity task, something like a password reset, we can have a chatbot replace up to 4 agents by doing those high volume tasks. And to John's point, we're not seeing a wholesale firing of agents. We're saying let's just move those basic tasks off of their plate and let them focus on the more complex ones. Second piece, again, it goes back to understanding what your customers want and understanding that you can build a lot of value going forward if your strategy reflects what your customer base is asking for. I said this before and I'll repeat it again, and I think the other panelists have said something similar. If you think all your customers want to talk to you on the phone, you are wrong, period. Now, some of them absolutely do, but a lot of them want a choice. They want a choice to communicate with you in a different way, and leveraging AI can facilitate that. Within the next 3 years, customers are going to prefer to use speech interfaces for roughly 70% of their interactions. It is about 40% today. So we're absolutely seeing a seismic shift in the way that customers want to interact with us. And the third piece is absolutely go into this with a plan. Both Vasily and John have mentioned this. The number of companies that we talk to that think AI is just a feature you go buy off the shelf like it's a carton of milk, it's really, really high. And the reality is that AI is going to be really customized and really tailored to what you do. Even if it's something that's fairly ubiquitous, like automatic payment processing, the way that you handle those payments might be different from the way that the next guy does. So we have to focus on how we're going to specifically implement it for your organization. If you just go in and say, hey, I want to invest in AI without a plan, you're going to get laughed out of the room. So John mentioned specifically repetitive activities. Think about the repetitive or mundane activities that you're paying a very skilled agent to handle today, like password resets, like shipping status updates. That's where you want to focus on first. Figure out the low-hanging fruit and tackle that. And ask yourself, if you just took 25% of those interactions and you converted them to an automatic process, what would that mean to the organization? Would your agents have more time to do other tasks? Would you be able to hire fewer agents? Would wait times decrease? Would your phone charges decrease? The answer is probably yes to all of the above, but put it into a practical example that's going to work for your organization. Find that low-hanging fruit and apply a conservative estimate to what's going to happen if you can automate that and take that off of the agent's plate. And to illustrate that point one step further, let's say you don't have any kind of chat at all today. Let's say your only channels today are maybe voice and email. Step one is not let's implement a chatbot, right? Step one should be figuring out what you're going to accomplish. Because if you just throw a bunch of money with AI at a problem without fully understanding where you should be investing, it's not going to accomplish a whole lot. So we want to figure out what kind of transactions it should handle, how many transactions it's going to have to handle, what kind of adoption rate you're going to have. In other words, if you've never implemented chat at all, your first stage should not be a full-blown AI chatbot. Let's figure out what kind of interactions your customers want to have and then build from there and then focus on the low-hanging fruit that way. So if you go into it with a very specific plan in mind for what you want to tackle and you understand how that's going to tie in with what your customers want to do, and then you can build a specific dollar amount ROI related to that, I think you're going to have a really compelling case to invest in AI going forward. If you don't have those three things, I mean, I think everybody on this panel will gladly accept your money, but we'd rather that you have a really solid plan in place so that we can both be successful.
Okay, good. Now, that's great advice, Tony, about that as well. And a really nice roll up in terms of just all of the, look at the budgets, the functionality, the implementation, a lot of challenges with this as well. So, we have a chance right now to go and have a general Q&A session. So it's a chance for everyone to go and type in their Q&A answers. So again, feel free to go and type in either the chat window or the Q&A window, what questions you have for our panel, for John, Tony, and Vasily. I'm going to start off with one actually for just in general, which is just a question about, and this is for all three of you, whoever wants to answer it, would you say there's a difference between what most consumers see as chatbots, the kind of chatbot 1.0 functionality versus what a virtual agent would deliver, that kind of 2.0 experience? Because it is different. There are a lot of preconceptions out there with consumers saying, I don't want to do another chatbot, I can't take this anymore, versus what the new ones will do. So what's your perspective on that? And actually, John, if you want to go first, what's your perspective on virtual agents versus the old chatbot mentality?
Well, I think, I look at it from the customer side and I look at it from the person who's in charge of a contact center. The customer really doesn't care whether it's live or whether it's self-serve, meaning that is that bot that's sitting on that website that you go to buy your whatever it is, your customer experience or your goods or product or service. Is it live or is it Memorex? I mean, they really don't care. I'll give you the perfect example. If somebody calls in and says, or calls in or goes to a chatbot and says, yeah, I'd like to find out the status of my mortgage, right? And does that person want to wait and sit there and wait for that live chat agent to say, hello, my name is Bob. How can I help you today? And then goes through all the scripting and then gets to finally an answer that says, yeah, Mike, you're not in underwriting yet. You're going to be in underwriting on October 15th. Call us back then or reach back out to us then. Or would you rather have it happen very quickly that you got the same thing from an AI-driven bot that says, yeah, Mike, you're going underwriting October 15th. You're not there yet. Check back with us then. It's about the experience. It's about the time that you save by doing that. That's one aspect of it. The other aspect from the contact center side is whether I'm using live or whether I'm using a virtual one, is what does that experience look like from a flow? If I start out with artificial intelligence, AI, I want to make sure that everything I've gathered, if the customer says, what Mike says, hey, I'd like to talk to a live agent now. You want to make sure that experience transfers to that live agent, all the information, the conversation, so that live agent's not having to go back and say, hey, Mike, how can I help you today? And start the whole conversation over again. So that's the two aspects that you have to take into consideration when you blend these systems together, is looking at it from the customer side and looking at it from the contact management side, solving both problems. And when you do that, you'll have a good experience. If you don't, then it can be, a trying experience for not only yourself as a manager, but also a customer as well.
Okay, good. And that's a really good point, John, about, again, that integration piece that's there. Tony, I see you nodding your head about this. Do you want to jump in with your comments or feedback?
Yeah, I agree with John 100%. If you ask the question, what are the differences between chatbots and virtual agents to a general consumer, you're going to get 100 different answers, right? The reality is, unless you live in this world like we kind of do, the customers don't really care as much as long as they get the answer that they want in a timely fashion. And then if they're given the opportunity to engage with a live human because they need more information, okay, that's what it boils down to, is the subtle differences that we perceive probably aren't as important to the customers as long as they're getting what they want in the end anyways.
Okay, good. Now, that makes sense as well. One follow-up, Tony, would you actually tell a customer this is like, hi, I'm a chatbot? Or would you actually just let them go until hands off to a live person if needed? I don't have a specific best practice, and I haven't seen any documentation that points one way or another. Consumers are pretty savvy. They know if they're not talking to a live body pretty quick. Within the next few years, the technology might evolve to where that's not maybe the Turing test is going to get solved here in the next few years. I haven't seen one way or another being more successful. As long as the customer gets the outcome that they want, they probably don't care if they're talking to a bot or a live human.
I would rather err on the side of tell them it's a bot, because if you try to convince them it's a human and it's obviously not, that's not going to go over well.
Okay. All right. Yeah. There's lots of trust when you do that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Makes sense. And Vasil, I've seen you smile and nod a few times during the last minute. What are your thoughts on this?
I agree with both John and Tony. The only thing I would probably add, which is a little bit different, we name our dogs, we name our cars, we name our boats. Like, it doesn't really matter. People want to kind of believe that there's some type of personality to something. I used to agree with Tony on the whole, like, I'm a chatbot. I would say you name it. People want to give it a personality. They'll figure it out pretty quick that it's some type of automation. But if it solves the problem, like, they don't care. Like, hey, I'm talking to Amy or Joe or whatever it may be. And you could actually give it a different personality every time someone contacts. It doesn't have to be the same, just like you have 1,000 agents within your business. But if something pops up, I'll tell you from personal experience, if it automatically starts a chatbot in my head, the first thing I think is either this thing's gonna be really stupid and can't solve my problem, or I'm going to try to trick it to see if it can't solve my problem. So, and then I'm just like, just get me a live agent at that point. So I think personality and naming it kind of goes a long way, but.
Okay, and that makes sense, right? With Alexa, with Siri, right? With all those things that are out there as well. Okay, good. All right, perfect. Now, I've got another question as well. And again, anyone who wants to answer can do this. And this is from Susheta, actually, in Canada. What is the best way to capture customer demographics? We talk a lot about millennial Gen Zs, customer demographics, without making them feel like we're gathering too much information from customers. So what's your answer with that when it comes to this technology?
I think it's important to realize that you have to kind of earn the right to ask people for information. You can't just go out there and have this laundry list of things that you want the customer to regurgitate to you. Meaning, you know, that demographic. You can grab subtle pieces of it. You can ask different questions. But if the first thing you get up there and just start hammering them around demographics, it could turn the customer off. So I think you want to limit it. Just like if you're doing I use the example of if you're doing a post-call survey of something, you're going to keep that to 2 or 3, 4 maybe questions. You're not going to give them 35 questions and say, oh, well, you answer this or you answer that, because what's going to happen is they're eventually going to hang up or disengage from the bot or whatever. So I think you have to do it in a subtle way, but not try to grab too much up front. Now, once you deliver an experience, then you can ask for a little more and a little more each time. I think that's the best way to do it.
Okay, that sounds good. And I don't know, Tony, do you want to add to that, or Vasily?
If it's over a social media channel, understand that the amount of demographic information that already is there is pretty staggering. So if it's through one of those other media channels, I think that the concerns about privacy might go out the window. But to respect the customer's privacy, think about your experiences. If you're starting a web chat and it's if it's an organization that you don't have a relationship with and you want to ask a question, if the first thing that it asks is for your name and your email address, I know my guard goes up, because I know that now I'm going to be on their email list, and maybe I don't want to be on their email list. So if it's just a ubiquitous question, if it's something basic up front, you know, give the information without having to look it up. But once you've established that relationship, once I've got a relationship with, you know, my Subaru dealer or the guy who sold me my mountain bike or anything like that, once I've got that relationship, I am happy to share that information, because then my interactions become tailored to me. You know how much I spent on my bike. You know how much, or you know the last time I brought my car in for service, and that is helpful to me. But beyond some identifying information, I don't know that there's a whole lot that you have to ask for in order to successfully route your customers, because they're going to build that history with you.
Yeah, I guess to add, you know, Mike, to what Tony's saying, the information is already there. You don't really even have to ask for it. Actually, I'll tell you that I think the frustrating part from a customer experience perspective is, while this information is already there, what the industry uses it for is marketing and sales tactics, rather than, I mean, you already know where I'm at. You already know how many kids I have or what cars I drive. Why don't you use that information to give me a better experience, knowing that, like, I don't have a lot of time to deal with it in this situation, or you've seen my last 15 interactions. You know what the answer is that I want. Just get me there. So I think, Susheta, that you don't really have to ask for it. Now, once you have it, there's a lot of things you have to do to protect it, right? There's a lot of regulations around it and privacy. Just don't make it creepy. Like, use it for the right purpose, which is the consumer just wants their problem solved. You don't have to be like, oh, by the way, I see that you're standing in front of your red car in the Home Depot parking lot. Like, just use that information to actually give a better answer that they're probably there trying to solve a product problem and something they just bought in the store. So.
Okay, and that's important as well. So hopefully, again, there's that issue about being spied upon a bit too intrusive, right? You don't want to have that happen at all. So comfort is important as well. I've got one last question for you, for all three of you, which is, and we'll start with you with this one, is in terms of, if you're looking, again, talking to contact center VPs, contact center SVPs, how do they know when the contact center is ready for the next stage of technology? I mean, some are still at phone and email, some are phone, email, and chat, some have done some basic chatbots, actually quite a few have. But how do you know when you're ready to go to like virtual agent or AI 2.0 or smarter mobility apps? How do you know you're ready for that?
It's ready. Like, I'll just say that every contact center is ready. The real question is this, because I've been looking at CX transformation for over a decade, right? It's 2020. We're talking about everybody's on all these like kicks around adding intelligence and automation. We've been talking about this for over a decade. Is your business ready for change? Can you get out of the mindset that you've been stuck in and actually now think we have to transform our business? Existing businesses move at a slower pace than someone starting a brand new idea, getting VC funding, and all of a sudden everybody's like, oh my gosh, how all of a sudden do they become a number one player in this retail market or in selling cars? Like, I mean, all these markets are being upended. The contact center, the customer service, they're ready. The business has to get through the fact that we are going to transform. There may be a couple bumps in the road, but we're going to come out the other end better for it. So forget all the things you've been thinking about for the last 5, 15, 20 years and just do it. Like, virtual agents are here. You just have to figure out the best way to integrate them and augment your organization. And don't create fallacies from marketing speak. I mean, John said it best. They don't replace live agents. That is the fallacy that's out there. And everybody's like, oh, I'm going to put virtual agents in. I'm going to reduce my workforce by 15%. No, there's not a study out there that actually says that right now. You're going to augment your workforce. You're going to take your agents and give them with a more complex task. And overall, you're going to increase your customer sat as a result. You're going to increase retention and lifetime value of your customers, and you're going to have your problem solved. But if your goal is to reduce agents, you might as well just say, let's just reduce the revenue of our business.
Okay. All right. Good point, Vasily. Appreciate that. And John, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm with Vasily there. I've never had anybody, I've been here 4 years doing this in this space, and I've never had a single client come up to me and say, yeah, we want to get rid of 300 agents. What's it going to cost to do that with getting rid of the live agents, doing it virtual? Candidly, I'm in the business of selling products, and that would be like, wow, let's jump on this really quick and figure this out. But that's not the case. It's typically trying to figure out how I can optimize something, create a better efficiency, create a better customer service experience for my customers. And I will say that I agree with Vasily. Change is inevitable. None of us like to change, and that goes with people that run contact center experiences as well. But the world is here, and you have to adapt with it, because if you don't, you're going to die. One of the things that will drive that adoption is customers will drive it. If you mentioned somebody that's only doing voice and email, and they're not doing, chat, they're not using IVAs, they're not doing other things, and their customers saying, hey, I want to contact you via, social media. I want to be able to use my mobile device, and you're not built there. You're going to get left behind very quickly. I'm surprised that, you aren't left behind already. So customers will drive that adoption as well. You look at places like outside the United States, outside North America, WhatsApp. If you don't integrate with WhatsApp and do things with WhatsApp, you probably don't have much of a business, because there's places in the third world countries where that's all they use. So I think the combination of accepting that you have to change and embracing these different technologies. And I will say too, that because of the cloud, a lot of the former risks that you have is no longer there. In past days, you build out huge premise environments, and when you invested in one technology, you were married to that technology. Today in the cloud, with the way contracts are set up and the fact that you're not having to buy huge CapEx expenses, if you do make a mistake, you can course correct a lot quicker than you could in the past. So I say, embrace the change. and become an expert in these things and learn about it. But the biggest thing the main point I want to let people know is AI is not stagnant. You have to invest in the training and tuning of that. And if you think that you're just going to buy an AI system and just pop it in there and it's going to sit there and do its magic, you're going to be sadly disappointed, because there is an investment in your expertise, in your time, in your vertical industry, in programming and training and tuning that AI experience.
Okay, it's really good points there. It's really good tips for the contact center leaders that are out there. Thank you, John. And Tony, what are your thoughts about this?
100% agreed. Just real quick, two other quick thoughts about it. John brought up that if you're only offering voice and email and your customers are crying to have social media or web chat, your customers probably aren't going to tell you that they want social media or web chat. They're just going to go to whoever offers it. And in all likelihood, like the question you asked originally was, how do we know if we're ready? And probably the more frightening but accurate way to think about it is the company that's going to put you out of business is already doing it. And if you're not ready to compete on that battlefront, that's where the consumers are going. And if you're not ready to support it, then you probably need to start thinking about your exit strategy.
Okay, so some great advice there as well. A little bit of a warning there, but great advice there as well in terms of how contact center leaders should be thinking about this technology coming up. And I want to thank all three of you. So John, Tony, Vasily, thank you for sharing these ideas, and thank you for sharing your time with our audience in terms of being able to just help us learn more about AI apps, virtual agents, mobility apps, etc. Really important topics to go and look at, and especially now, given that a lot of contact center leaders are actually putting together their plans for customer experience transformation, digital transformation for 2021, and budgets, of course, to go along with that as well. So thank you to all three of you for doing that. I really appreciate this. And I just want to sum up as well for the people that are watching this webinar is that a recording of this webinar will be available for you. So I'll actually send the link out. There's been so much information the past hour. I know if you're taking notes and everything, but if you want to review it, in terms of looking at the video later on, the recording later on, or share it with other people in your organization or colleagues you have in the contact center industry, please feel free to do so. The link to the recording, it'll be put up on YouTube, and the link will be sent out to you within about a week or so. So consider maybe later next week, the actual link will go out to you via email for everyone signed up for today's session. I also want to thank 8x8 as well in terms of sponsoring this session, and Intelligence for sponsoring this session as well and helping to organize that. And again, at the very bottom, it mentions about Intelligence. If you want to find out more about Cloud Contact Center, the link is there for you. Also, in terms of looking at 8x8, Inference, and UJET, so John, Tony, and Vasily, for you as well. I know you're available through LinkedIn and through social media as well to be able to so people can learn more about what you have to offer. So thank you again for sharing the information with us. And thanks to everybody in the audience watching this for participating in today's session. And I want to wish you all the best as well. So take care, and we'll look forward to seeing you again at our next webinar. Thanks, everybody.